My name's Laura Lewis and I work for the Masorti Foundation. Masorti means tradition, and tradition is the name of conservative Judaism everywhere in the world except North America. And it's the name of our congregations in Israel. And although I am speaking from a Masorti perspective, in reality, what I'm really speaking about is non-Orthodox Judaism in Israel and the status of pluralism, because Orthodoxy is thriving in Israel, but what's happening to non-Orthodox Judaism in Israel, and how do we make Israel a pluralistic state? Come in. So I also want to say, before I start, that I'm in a relationship with Israel. I love Israel. I've been going to Israel for many, many years, all of my adult life, probably once a year at least. And like any relationship, it has its ups and downs, but I do love Israel, and the purpose of this talk today is not to bash Israel, it's not to bash Orthodoxy, it's just to say what I believe to be fundamentally just, which is to have a state of Israel that recognizes all Jews equally. And so I'm going to explain why that is not the case, and what we might be able to do about it, what I think we can do about it. But I thought first of all I'd find out a little about you, and how many of you have been to Israel? Well, okay. And did any of you go with a synagogue group? How many of you know a Jew by choice?
Oh, sure.
And are any of you related to Jews by choice? Okay. And how many of you know about Israel's rabbinut? A little.
You mean the structure whereby there's really only one voice?
Yeah, well, there's a Sephardic and an Ashkenazic voice. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Both voices are Orthodox.
Both Orthodox, yes. And I would go as far as to say ultra-Orthodox, really. Yes. So, this is Israel in 1947, everyone dancing in the street. It brought together Jews from all over the world. It was a giant ingathering. And you can see men and women. You've seen all the pictures of men and women doing the hora in the street together, dancing to the music, jubilant, very, very happy. So that was 1947. This is the Declaration of Israel's independence. And as you can see, it promises freedom of religion, conscience, speech, education, and culture. This was very, very important to Israel and to Jews everywhere after the Shoah, that we be free to practice our religion however we saw fit. So how come today Israel's the only country in the Western world where Jews may not practice their religion as they see fit? So by that I mean, how do you get married? Who gets to get buried in a Jewish cemetery? Who gets to give you a divorce? And who gets to convert you? And who counts you as a Jew? I think the real issue is back to the beginning. So who is a Jew? And we know that this is an area that's full of conflict for our people. And how did it get to be the way that it is in Israel, where there is only one way to practice Judaism at the moment? And one statistic I should give you right up front is that the rabbinut, and I'm about to explain why, controls about $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year in rabbi salaries, subsidies to synagogues, and Jewish education, the kashrut, the organization of kashrut licenses, $1 billion a year. The Masorti and the Reform movements get a couple of $100,000 each. So although they're talking about changes in the rules and who can be a rabbi, the reality is that's what we get. A couple of $100,000, $1 billion. So the reason that all this happened was Ben-Gurion's status quo agreement. And what is that? Essentially, it's when they were starting the state of Israel, there was talk amongst the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, that they would go to the UN and protest the formation of a state of Israel that was being founded by men and women, and not by God. And so in order to get the Haredi on board with the establishment of the state and the partition vote and the Declaration of Independence and all those things that were needed to form the state of Israel, Ben-Gurion offered the Haredi control over certain issues. So the issues were most things that affect your life as a Jew. Shabbat, that Israel would observe Shabbat, that the Orthodox would govern the rules of kashrut, that there would be only religious marriage, no civil marriage, and only religious divorce, therefore, and that they would control the Jewish education budget. So in other words, Israel was not going to be a theocracy. It could still be a democratic state with a government and a Supreme Court that was, duly elected government, but there would be some theocratic leanings. Please come in, you won't be interrupting us. So this is David Ben-Gurion, who married his Bashet, his intended, Paula Munn-Weiss, in 1917 in a town hall ceremony in New York City. So if you think about it, if they had a civil marriage, they couldn't have had a civil marriage in Israel today. Ben-Gurion was not a religious man. And halakhically, he was never actually married because he didn't have a religious ceremony. And the top right-hand picture are the pictures of their grave plots together side by side. But technically, halakhically, they were never married. And the bottom right picture is a glaring statistic, which was that 25% of Israeli couples choose to marry outside of the rabbinate, and they do that by going to Cyprus and other countries, because Israel does recognize all marriages from abroad according to international conventions, but not within the state of Israel. And in fact, now in Israel there's a law that if a rabbi marries you outside of the rabbinate, you and the rabbi, the couple and the rabbi, could be put in jail for 2 years. So this picture is actually of Russian immigrants to Israel, and in 2011, 170 couples went to Larnaca in Cyprus, and the mayor of Larnaca married them in a mass civil ceremony. So that's the status of marriage and what the absence of civil marriage does in Israel. So these are Israel's I don't know what to call them really, companions. The states colored in black are states like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, not exactly bastions of democracy, and Israel. These are all countries which don't have freedom of marriage. So I don't think that Israel should be in that company. We are the only democratic state in the Middle East, except when it comes to religion. So this is an opinion poll. About, I think, 2009, Ynet conducted a poll, and the poll said that 500,000 Israelis actually identify as Masorti or Reformi, which means that they identify as Reform and traditional Jews. It doesn't mean they actually go to a Reform or a conservative synagogue, but it means if you were to ask them what kind of Jew are they, that's what they think of them. That's how they think of themselves. And so you can see that the vast majority of Israelis, 56.6%, consider themselves secular or chiluni. And you can see at the top, 9.7 don't know or decline to answer the question, what kind of Jew are you? If you don't know it, you probably don't care about it, which means you're probably secular as well. So we could add that almost 10% to the 56%. So you can see there's a great distancing in Israel from religion, a great alienation from religion. And the vast majority of Israelis don't feel that they belong anywhere on the religious spectrum. This is another way of looking at the statistics from the third Israel Democracy Institute poll, that 75% of Israel is Jewish, 25% of it is Arab, and 4% are others. So this is Israel's demographic makeup. And you'll see how that impacts Israel's democracy. And you can see that the number of Haredi is actually small. It's 10 to 11%. And we saw in the previous slide that Masorti and Reformit are about 9%. So we're talking about 11% governing the rights of the 56% who are secular and the 9% who are reform and conservative. And this is how we end up with Israel's political system. How does religion impact Israel's politics? And you can see here that the parliament is a democracy, and the party who wins the election is the party that appoints the prime minister. It's not like in America where you vote for president and then whoever the president's party is, that's the party in power. In Israel and Britain and other parliamentary democracies, it's the opposite. But the thing that's really different in Israel that I think is the root of the problem is there are no constituencies. So when I get fed up with the way my congressman behaves, I go see him in Washington or at his local office in Westchester County. In Israel, there's no one to go to because you don't have a constituency representative. And that means that every member of the Knesset, of which there are 120, are not accountable to anybody but themselves. Until the next election.
When you say constituency, you mean a certain district?
Yeah, no districts. No districting.
No, there's not representational government.
So what does that mean? It means that there's lots of bargaining. If you have 120 seats, and you know the expression 3 Jews, 10 opinions. Well, in Israel, it's 3 Jews, 50 opinions. It's a complicated place to live. It's a complicated part of the world. And no one party has a clear majority, which means that every party that gets the biggest block of seats then has to go into coalition with smaller parties, which are then disproportionately powerful. There has never been one party in Israel that won the 61 seats in the Knesset, which is really quite telling. This is the last election in 2013. I got this job in May of that year, and I was told I had a 3-year window, 4-year window till the next election, right? Because this was the first election since 1977 where religious parties were not in the coalition. And that window it closed. And now the next election will be in 2013. You can see here, though, that March 17th, 2015, I'm sorry. So you can see here that they have a total of 68 in the coalition, which gives them a majority of 16. That's actually one of the better election results. Sometimes the majority is even smaller. So these are the demographic realities that I've just explained to you, and how do they impact Israeli politics? Israel is a very young country. That's another thing we need to know about the impact of demographics on democracy. So the average age of an Israeli is 28. But they're very mature, 28, because they go into the army. And they also marry way younger, and they have, even secular Israelis, have way more children than the average North American Jew. Here's another demographic reality. Currently, 25% of Israeli second graders are Arab Israeli, and another 25% are Haredi. That means today, 50% of all children in second grade are not invested in the Zionist enterprise. They are not invested in seeing Israel survive as a democratic, non-theocratic, democratic state. And that's a pretty scary demographic. So what does that mean for a Zionist future of Israel? A recent poll said that 25% of secular Israeli young people, around 15 years old, expressed a desire to live someplace else. They're tired of carrying the tax burden for a very large growing minority of Haredi kids. And despite changes to the law, they're still not going into the army in large numbers. And in fact, our Lone Soldier project takes care of Haredi kids who do go into the IDF and then end up excommunicated by their families, which is another issue in Israel. So, and they're tired of carrying the tax burden, and they're tired of carrying the financial burden of going into the army, of being called up on Miluim every year till they're 40 years old, and they're thinking about leaving. So I think what Masorti and Reform are trying to do is pull Israel back from the extremes and back from the brink of what could be an impending disaster for the country. And at the same time as people are looking back and questioning, what is a Jewish state? If I'm willing to lose my life, if I'm paying 51% taxes, if I'm going into this army every year and leaving my job and leaving my family to serve, why? What's important about a Jewish state? And what does being Jewish mean to me? Because if you are the 60% of Israelis who are Chiluni or secular, why are you doing this? Why do you care? And Israelis are really beginning to ask that question, and they're seeking. They've become a country of seekers. And I think that we're working very hard to give them answers, that there's more than one way to be a Jew. Why do they think there's only one way to be a Jew? Because of $1 billion. It's very simple. And if you think that the only way to be a Jew is to wear a black hat or a sheitel, that the only way to be a Jew is the messages that are coming at you from all kinds of notices in the street, walk on this pavement, sidewalk if you're a woman, this one if you're a man, get to the back of the bus. All those messages are coming at Israelis, both religious and secular. And the secular ones go, this is not for me. And the Orthodox ones go, bring it on, you know. And when I was going to Mahane Yehuda, which is the large market in Jerusalem, it's a fabulous place, the Shuk. As I was walking up the stairs, I saw this woman in a complete burqa from head to toe. But a little girl didn't have her head covered. The child with her was about 10 or 11. And I kept looking at the burqa going, it doesn't feel right. There's something wrong with the head covering. She wasn't a Muslim. She was a Jew. And she comes from an area outside of Beit Shemesh where women are now completely covered, completely head to foot. So there's a problem, and we think of it as a religion of fear. Judaism is being seen in Israel as this religion of coercion and fear, and not a religion of joy and love and great community, which is what we have here in North America. And there's a great deal of talk, and although I haven't been at Limmud this year, I bet that a lot of conversations were about post-denominationalism and how people are moving beyond being labeled a Reform or a conservative Jew. And that's what the Pew study said. But actually in Israel, they love what we American Jews take for granted. They think that we have the answer. And so in the year and a half that I've been at Masorti, we've grown from 68 to 73 kehilot. And unlike the typical synagogue in Israel, which is, you go there for minyan and then you're done, our communities offer cradle-to-grave services just like they do in America, those that have buildings. So that's another issue in Israel. So in Israel, about 90% of the land is owned by the government, or one kind of government or another. So if you want to build a Reform or conservative synagogue, you have to get permission, you have to get land, you have to get a lease. And historically, so many mayors were unwilling to give a lease to a non-Orthodox synagogue because they were going to get so much pushback from the ultra-Orthodox. So even just before Rosh Hashanah this year, one of our communities that had been on the ground for more than 30 years in Jerusalem lost its lease. We got it back, but it did lose its lease, and there were 8-10 weeks of absolute frantic negotiation. And this most recent mayor of Jerusalem, who's in his second term of office, has been far more friendly to Masorti and Reform Judaism. But historically, it's been very difficult to get land. One of our communities met in a basement for 30 years. And they finally got out of the basement and got a room in the equivalent of a JCC. But when I went there that Shabbos for services, the door was locked because the kashrut supervisor of the building changed the lock. That's what goes on. So we're up against a lot, but we still are growing, 73 kehilot. But some of them are tiny, they're minyanim, they meet on Shabbos only, or on holidays. They don't meet every day of the week. We have very few purpose-built buildings, and we have about 20 part-time and full-time rabbis for those 73 kehilot, because quite frankly, we can't pay them. Nearly 50% though of our rabbis are women, and that's Chaya Baker, who works in French Hill. She runs a synagogue in French Hill that has a beautiful kindergarten, absolutely magnificent, and offers many, many social services and outreach projects. Chaya's synagogue is sandwiched between Israeli Arabs and the Haredi, and they're encroaching on her all the time, and the neighborhood is changing, and we wonder, will it survive? But she is growing, and her kindergarten is very successful. Many of you have heard about Women of the Wall, and I think that they've done us all a remarkable service, anyone who cares about religious pluralism in Israel and religious democracy. But there is a difference between Women of the Wall and Masorti and Reform Judaism, and it's a very small difference, but in Judaism, small can be very large. So the difference is that Women of the Wall want to pray at the kotel behind a mechitza. And they want to have the right to wear talit and tefillin and read from the Torah behind the mechitza. Reform and conservative Jews don't want a mechitza. We want to pray egalitarian, men and women together, side by side, families and on the bima. And that's a very big difference. I talked to you before about having difficulties getting leases. This is Sivan Yechieli. He's the mayor of Kfar Vradim, and he wants, in many of the growing periphery communities, they want our synagogues. They want us to come in because we're highly educated Jews who live in the real world, who have jobs, and we represent growth and modernity with some Judaism going forward. So he's been one of our great advocates. We do a lot of outreach programs. This is a picture of our Ethiopian program in Katamon. Katamon is a district in Jerusalem which has a high Ethiopian population. And the Ethiopian kids are still suffering. This morning on NPR, I heard a broadcast about how hard it is for first-generation kids in college whose parents didn't go to college, and how they feel they have to out themselves to tell their peers that their parents are manual workers or they didn't go to college. Well, if you're Ethiopian, times that by 1,000 in Israel. So we have 20 youth movement chapters all over the country, which are it's called Noam. In fact, USY is called Noam also everywhere else in the world. And our Noam kids are amazing, and it really is a little crucible for social action and leadership growth. And they go into the Ethiopian area in Katamon, and they encourage the kids to join up, and they mentor them. So the Ethiopian children of Ethiopian immigrants are being mentored by, sixth generation Israelis. So it's working very well. But it's a process. This is a picture of Natan Sharansky. When he came out of Russia, the world's most famous refusenik, he didn't know much about non-Orthodox Judaism. But now he's head of the Jewish Agency, and he understands that he has a responsibility to all Jews, no matter where they are on the spectrum of observance. And when we were in Israel in August on a solidarity mission, he told us, "Why do you speak so quietly? American Jews have the right to expect more from Israel. And if you don't speak up, it will never happen." So not only should Israeli Masorti Jews speak up, but American conservative Jews should speak up, and Reform Jews too. So on your seats, I see some of them on the floor over there, are some flyers. And because I am working for Masorti, I've been very involved in Makaz. Makaz is the political party representing conservative Jews at the World Zionist Organization's election. And I'm telling you about it because you do have an opportunity to redress some of that imbalance with the $1 billion versus a couple of 100,000, because the World Zionist Organization has a budget. And that budget is allocated according to how many votes we all get at the WZO elections. I'm on the slate for the conservative movement, Masorti, and this is just a way that we're trying to get Israel to listen to the voices of American Jewry. And when we go speak to Israeli politicians, we need to tell them that we have the backing of our own community here in North America. So whoever you vote for, whether it's Makaz, whether it's the Reform Movement, go to the election site and vote. I really would urge you, show that you care and that you're invested in the outcome. The other way Masorti reaches out is through reaching out to kids with disabilities and their families. We've been doing this now for 10 or 11 years, and it's a remarkable thing. We've bar and bat mitzvahed about 3,500 kids with special needs, some of whom cannot talk, and use computer generated voices for them. They have all a huge range of disabilities, and everybody is invited in to the program. You don't have to be, and in fact that's true for everything that we do. You don't have to be a conservative or Masorti Jew. It's a warm, inviting, welcoming place for everybody. Well, this is one of the other questions: who is a Jew and how do you get buried in Israel? And Yaniv Ra'on was an Israeli soldier whose mother was a Jew by choice, and he couldn't get buried. And in fact, my colleague, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, my colleague Yizhar Hess in Israel wrote a column which was on the Ynet, which is the Jerusalem Post's website, about this family who made Aliyah decades ago. They were both Jews by choice, and he went to Minyan every day. She went to shul on Shabbos. They kept a kosher home. They raised their children as Jewish young men, and she got cancer. And she went to the rabbi and asked about where she would be buried, and she could not be buried in the local cemetery. So this went on and on and on, and you know Jews need to be buried pretty quickly. On Sunday was supposed to be the day of her funeral, and they still didn't have a burial plot for her. And that morning, the mayor of her town drove up in a tractor and dug her a cemetery plot right alongside the wall of the cemetery, and declared this whole area, I guess via eminent domain, this would now be an open burial cemetery for anybody who wanted to be buried in his town. But that's the kind of obstacles that we face. This young man died for Israel. So what are we doing about it? So just before the last election, we founded Jewish Pluralism Watch, which is a research institute. We have about 7 to 9 interns on the ground in the Knesset. So when the Knesset goes into session, we publish a questionnaire, and we ask you, how do you feel about Jewish pluralism? That's the only issue, the only one we're watching. And at the beginning, they weren't so keen on filling in the questionnaire, but we have a website. It's live. It's updated every day, and it monitors every single thing the MKs say, do, and vote on this issue. And it is holding them accountable. It's kind of modeled on AIPAC and the League of Women Voters, so that there's a central place to go to find out how every Knesset member, how that platform, how that party feels about religious pluralism. And then we're trying to educate the public. So for this election, actually, we've published guides so that when you go to a forum and there's all these political candidates. Here are the questions to ask them to find out where you stand. And we're trying to turn every member of a Masorti congregation into an advocate for religious pluralism. And we lobby. So this is us going to meet with Mark Regev, who was a spokesperson for Netanyahu. This is a popular newscaster, Nitzan Horowitz, who's a Meretz MK, and he's openly gay, the first openly gay member of the Knesset in Israel. By the way, Tel Aviv was voted the #1 most friendly gay city in the world. So Israel's a complicated place. Nothing is simple. And Jerusalem has a Jewish Pride Parade. I was there for it. It's amazing. In Jerusalem, anything is possible. But women must go to the back of the bus. You know, it's like such a complicated place. So this is the kind of thing we do with the money that is given to us by American Jews and by Israeli Jews. This is a PR campaign, and it's aimed at those Haredim who think they shouldn't go to work. And it shows, you know, have you seen the wine Rashi from Israel? Rashi was a vintner. He had a job. He went to work every day. And, you know, the Rambam had a job. So this was Sages in the Yellow Pages. And it says there that Torah that is not accompanied by a worldly trade will in the end amount to nothing and will lead one into sin. And we believe that. Work is healthy. So I love this picture because I think it really did make him want to pull his hair out. It's a bulletin board in Mir Sharim, where, by the way, I once lived for 2 months. Well, that's a whole other story. This was just in the back of the bus, but with a message. We also are very politically active and socially active. So this was a protest in Bet Shemesh where that 8-year-old girl was attacked because she wasn't considered, I mean, she was dressed appropriately. She was wearing tights, a pretty long skirt, but something about her wasn't quite right, and she was attacked on her way home from school for being immodestly dressed. So this is the Pluralism Forum, not to be confused with Jewish Pluralism Watch. And the Pluralism Forum is a forum that we belong to in Israel that's working very hard across all platforms. Anybody who's interested in religious pluralism, working together to try and influence politicians and people, to educate people. Because when Women of the Wall first started demonstrating, and they've been doing so for 2 decades, Israelis thought, this is an American problem. You know, I don't want to wear a talit. Why should it bother me? But actually, it's now bothering Israelis too. It's really bothering them because they're beginning to understand the consequences of not having religious choice. So, although I'm here as a representative of Masorti, I wanted to tell you that we're working in coalition both in Israel and now in America. There's a new coalition to which the Reform and Conservative movement belong, and many, many other Jewish organizations across the spectrum from liberal to Orthodox who have formed a coalition called the Jewish Religion Equality Coalition. And we meet, and we're working together with the Israeli coalition to move the agenda forward. And there's an election coming up. It's pretty important. This is our agenda, which I've pretty much covered. You know, choice in burials, equality in conversion, a core curriculum for all government-funded schools so that everybody gets an education, doesn't only speak Yiddish, no gender separation in public places, and limitations on the rabbinical court's authority. And if we were to have civil marriage, which is the place we've all agreed in these coalitions that we're going to start, just offering Israelis the opportunity to have a civil marriage and therefore a civil divorce and not have to go through the rabbinical courts. And there's some good news. In March 2014, you know that the legislation was passed to require ultra-Orthodox youth to serve in the army. it's having some impact, and many of them are doing social service work in their own communities, which are generally quite impoverished because of the number of children. The Tal law, which exempted ultra-Orthodox Israelis from serving in the army, was overturned, and so that's another way that we're making change. And the Israeli government has agreed to hire up to 15 Reform and Masorti rabbis. That was the good news. The bad news is they put so many restrictions on it, and it could only be rabbis in the periphery, not in cities. They had to live in the communities. Well, if you can't pay salaries, it's very hard to put a rabbi in a community 24/7. He might go there, or she might go there for Shabbat, but the rule was they had to be in situ. And that $1 billion, it's not going to pay them. It's going to come out of a culture religion, not the religion. Yes, the cultural ministry, not the religious ministry. And I think the best news of all was that the area at Robinson's Arch, which is sort of around the corner, it's still part of the wall, the supporting wall of the temple. The Robinson's Arch area, which is the egalitarian section of the Kotel, was greatly expanded by Naftali Bennett, who is not a Masorti Jew, far from it. He's a black velvet kippah wearing Orthodox Jew, but he understood the importance of non-Orthodox Judaism in the diaspora. He built a platform in 2.5 days before the Rosh Hashanah before last. And now several hundred Jews who want to pray in an egalitarian fashion can pray on this temporary platform. It's very stable, it won't last forever, but it is a very big start. And there are architectural plans drawn up by the Jewish agency to eventually expand access to the egalitarian Kotel, so that you won't have to go down the stairs or, endanger life and limb to get there. It's a slight exaggeration, but it's not as easily accessible as the regular Kotel, and to incorporate it into the Kotel Plaza. And these are just some examples of other things we're doing. We have our own kashrut for wine, our own chesher. The wine bottle, though, the back of the wine bottle has a label, a disclaimer label that says, "Don't get confused, this isn't really kosher," because that was the only way we could prevent ourselves from getting sued. So we consider it kosher, but it isn't considered kosher by the Orthodox kashrut authorities. And Shoshana Winery, just for what it's worth, great wine. But she only makes 3,500 bottles a year, so it doesn't get to America. So there's a lot that we can do for the sake of Jews worldwide, and no less for Israeli society. I think this is important to us as well as it's important to them. It's our homeland too. That's our spiritual homeland, and we have a right to have a say-so, I think, for so long. And I remember somebody saying this to me when I was 17 on my first trip to Israel: "You don't give your blood, you don't have a right to speak." I don't think Israelis feel that way anymore, and I know that American Jews, diaspora Jews, shouldn't feel that way. This is our homeland too. Tell that to the Jews of Copenhagen, and tell that to the Jews of Paris. Imagine those people died because they were Jewish, and I don't know if this happened, but I'm willing to bet that it did, that they had to scrutinize their birth certificates. Were they really Jewish when they offered them a burial in Israel? What if it had been me at the kosher butcher? Would I have been allowed to be buried in Israel? That's a question. So actually I would, because I grew up in England and we didn't have conservative Judaism. So I actually had 3 Orthodox rabbis at my wedding. 3. I had a Diane as well. How to protect the Zionist and democratic values. I think support Masorti and JPW, support the reform movement in Israel, Arza. We're all doing great work. Vote in the World Zionist Conference elections. Really, it's very important. And support the work of the Pluralism Forum and JREC, which are working very hard in the US and in Israel to bring about an Israeli society that we all want to see. And last but not least, vote. Thank you. Yes. It's really about that do you know hegemony? Hegemony is like control of all the messages, that there's only one message going out to Israelis. Because of their disparate funding and the idea that there's only one legitimate way to be Jewish, and you deny any money and funds to anybody, any other way to be Jewish, that's the only message that gets worldwide, wide circulation. And that wonderful Sages in the Yellow Pages ad that I showed you, that's been the only one we could afford to run. Because we have no money. So how do you get the word out? That's the real challenge. The only messages people receive are that, and I cannot tell you how many Jews over the years from Israel we bring to my synagogue in New Rochelle, New York, who are living near Gaza. And we bring them to New York for 2 weeks for respite so that they get out of the way of the missiles. And they're not Orthodox Israelis, they're Chiloni, secular Israelis. And we ask them to come to shul with us because we're going anyway and we'd like to include them. Oh, I don't go to shul. I never go to synagogue. Then they come and they go, wow, if this existed in Israel, I would go. And 73 kahilot plus the Reform kahilot. But they don't know about them. So that's why we have to do a better job at getting the messaging out. So the Fuchsberg Center is a wonderful, wonderful institution, and it was actually named after someone from my own synagogue. Yes, his daughter is a member of our shul. So the Fuchsberg Center is a home for North American conservative Jews who go to Israel. And historically, I think Masorti and Reform were seen as an American Anglo import. I never understand this in Israel. People come from Argentina, people come from the former Soviet Union, and they're never considered, Anglos or immigrants. It's a sort of pejorative. But today, 2/3 of our boards are Israeli, native-born Israelis. They're not American Jews who made Aliyah. And that means, it's good, because it means we're taking root and we're not just this little tiny subset of North American Jews trying to find something that brings a little bit of home to Israel. This is an organically Israeli movement. And I did want to put that out there because I think there were a lot of misconceptions that we're still primarily a home for North American Jews. Having said that, I studied at the conservative yeshiva and I enjoyed every minute of it and slept at the Fuchsberg Center. So you have a question?
Yes.
So there is an organization called Masorti Olami. Masorti Olami is Masorti around the world. I'm not exactly sure how many communities there are in Paris, but I think it's 5. I think there are 5 congregations in Paris that are Masorti, and there are Masorti communities growing all over. They tend to take a quiet voice, but they are there, and I've met many of them. In fact, when I was studying at the conservative yeshiva. To answer your question about Israelis should vote according to what's important to them, I think that this is becoming important to them because of some of the reasons I outlined. If you believe in a democratic state and 50% of your second graders don't, you have a problem. And if you're going to pull back from extremes, you're going to need to build a healthy core center. And I think that this has a lot to do with Israel's security, because when extremes get to control the government, it alienates Israel from many of her friends. It not only alienates Israelis within Israel, it alienates Israel's friends in the greater global community. And I think that's a real problem for Israel's security. And as someone who spent 10 years of her life doing diplomatic advocacy for Israel, not working for the Israeli government, but elsewhere, I can tell you that that's something I heard a lot about. So I think that Israel's security needs a healthy democracy in Israel. Any other question? Yeah.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of debate in the army as to what to do with kids who might not follow their commander, who might, there was a lot of fear that they might instead follow their rabbi. And if their rabbi said, don't do it, there would be mutiny, or whatever it's called in the army, not the navy. In fact, that didn't happen. So that's the good news. So what I hear, because I'm the primary fundraiser for Masorti in North America, is we're post-denominational. We don't want to give to any one denomination. And I hear that from federations, and I hear that from wealthy philanthropists. And you're so small, how do I know my money's going to be effective? And I feel that presentations like this are a way to move that along. And there was a reason that I put the slide in, what we American Jews take for granted, Israelis want. And I think that American philanthropists and federations have not caught up with that message. There are some federations who are enormously helpful to us. The one in Atlanta, for example, is really a stalwart supporter of our Kehillah in Omer. We've had some money from JFNA who've helped us build shelters. Our shelters were enormously popular in the South last year, and people flocked in from all over, and we didn't have enough room for them. Because our synagogues offer services. We're community centers, and the other synagogues are not. So we had on tap all the time entertainment for the kids, things for them to do, activities, programs for adults. So our shelters were very, very popular. And we do get some money, but truly we run the whole budget on $3 million. 73 kehilot. That's smaller than the budget of many North American large synagogue, or middle-sized synagogue actually. There was a midterm election for local government, and in the last midterm election, 5 mayors were elected who had religious pluralism as part of their platform. That was enormous. It had never happened before. So it's slow, small steps, but it is beginning. Yes. Tippi Livni, who I think of as like a feminist Jewish woman, you know, until a few years ago, like we're talking 2 or 3 years ago, she had never set foot in a Masorti or Reform synagogue. She had never sat next to a man in synagogue. She didn't know she could have an aliyah. That's what we're dealing with. So it's a slow process, but I think it's changing. Yes. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.